Before we take a break, I'm sure a lot of you have questions, but I'm just going to kick off with a few, and I'm going to go in opposite order. Djamila, thank you. That was absolutely fascinating. Both, I mean, to begin with thinking through the significance of indigenous culture who are often, as you say, on the receiving line of climate change. I think something that Adrian will probably continue that conversation later, but then so important to present this knowledge. I wanted to ask you, although I found it fascinating that you've obviously so successfully worked outside of academia, the potentially racist ground of academia in Brazil, but I wondered if you're seeing any changes as a result of the work that you're doing. Do you feel that as you said, the publications being picked up by undergraduates and postgraduates, but do you see a change in the teaching faculty?
Yes, especially because the students sometimes bring and force the professor and started to face this Eurocentric view. Because when I studied philosophy, I remember that when I decided to study Simone de Beauvoir, and I asked for the professor, oh, do you want to be my advisor? I want to study Simone de Beauvoir. Simone de Beauvoir, who? Sartre's wife? And, oh, okay. So this is the kind of thing that we're facing in Brazil. So I think that I decided to do this collection as a way to revenge, because it was so difficult to study what I want to study. And now to see all these young people going to the book launches, in the universities, adopting the books, for us it's so important because it's not a matter of you need to read that because it's written by Black people. The thing is, it's not reasonable that in this society we are not reading what we are doing. So now we can see these changes, and I think it's important to say that it's an independent project. We don't have any kind of financial support, and you have to struggle to publish all these people. Only last year, I've done 175 events, and I am very, very tired, but it's because I have some visibility in Brazil, so I needed to use my visibility to make other people visible. So now I want them to go alone because I'm very tired, and I hope that in Brazil, the institutions maybe can look for this kind of projects, not as a threatening, but as a way to think how it's good for all the Brazilian society.
Amazing that you funded this. So you need to somehow post somewhere on our Verbier thing so we can all support what you're doing. We talked a lot this morning in the sort of smaller sessions, particularly about a younger generation and how important they are. And I think I wanted to ask you, Roberto and Rosario, about, because you're both teachers for such a long period of time, sort of what changes you've seen in the student body in terms of conversations around the subjects that we're addressing today, and in particular in relation to design.
I think also is what is amazing, and we were discussing the privilege to be in academia, is that you get older, but students are always 18. And this is incredible because you really see the change from one year to another. You have, when I started teaching, and Roberto everybody wanted to be a super designer, Philippe Stark, or, you know, they have this idea of belonging to an industry and be the individual. And through the years you see, but it happens suddenly even, that students are not interested in being individuals. They want to be working in collectives and for society. And that's huge, because when it's not so much what you can teach them, but what you can build together. And it's very important that they do have already come with this attitude and this different language and approach to what they can do in the future. And they're not so worried, and I know it's worry in the future, they're not so worried about, am I gonna earn money, but what is gonna be my place in society, what can I do? So this is, and for us, the mission is how can together create those places? Where can we work that can be effective?
Yeah, no, well, I think you said it well. I think that is just that comment like we were talking this morning, no, that has been that change in the understanding what are the materials for design. So normally, as a designer, you would work with wood, plastics, I don't know, tangible things, and how slowly over the last years we started really generating a culture that where the material is no longer something physical, but is much more how you engage both with communities, but also as a designer, how you gain that power to really think that without having to belong to a company or having to work for a gallery, you can still have an impact and be part of this world.
Thank you. Joan, I asked you lots of questions, so I won't ask you another one, but I'm sure other people have questions that they would like to ask. So I think there's a microphone. No microphone, so you just have to shout. Then I will ask my one more question for Joan, which is also about just coming back to the role of children in your work, which you sort of touched on, Joan, but again, it's been such a, I was hearing from the moderators in all of the groups this morning, both the sort of hopefulness around another generation, but also the pressure and anxiety that it's producing for that generation and all the ways in which that's been evidenced. I don't know, I mean, it was so important for you to have their presence in your recent work, but maybe you can talk a little bit more about a sort of generational shift, if that's part of that, or if it's really just about representing an age group.
No, I mean, I said this morning that one of the events that when I had the show at the Tate, the children who were connected with one of the shootings in America marched in America. You know, and that I thought was a huge event and very important that children were marching. And I'm hoping that more children demonstrate, because I think that's one of the hopes. I mean, they haven't marched since. That was about 2 years ago. And I think the children's voices are really important. And I do think children have anxiety. You know, they worry about what's happening. On the other hand, I think it's very real that they know that they're being told in school what's going on. I mean, you have a child, so you know. They're being told in school what's happening, and I think they should be brought into the conversation. I never discussed with the children that I worked with, because I didn't want to impart any of my worries or anxieties, but they all know, you know. So I think Greta, no matter what you may think of her, is an amazing figure, and I hope she inspires more children.
Elvira. So Elvira was asking about whether you see your your practices and their methodologies, how they then begin to relate to other spheres. Is that correct, Elvira? Other spheres and other areas of their contexts. Other audiences, other contexts, yeah.
I think precisely where, I mean, the way we teach is towards that. Is rooted on design, let's say, is within the culture of design. But certainly the students do act in many other places, so we try to, in fact, hijack other spheres. And a lot of students are interested in politics, and they try to enter think tanks and work in the government, not for the government, so much as to try to have these pilot schemes where how can design think through different things. I mean, we have a friend who is Daniel Charney, and he's creating these experts, and he's doing a whole project where is one-to-one. One person helps another person with a very specific problem. But then we certainly see this as something that can be applied to the NHS, or how you go from these methods that we do in a small groups or with in context that we control, how can they become systems? So that's actually the intention, and we see students doing this successfully, which is.
But I think like projects like the one that Rosario has just mentioned, I think that it is that idea that generates that thinking. That is like normally you associate design with resolving the problems of the many. When you see this project, precisely you understand that the power of design is to resolve the problems of one person completely. And I think that it kind of changes the shift. So if you carry on, it gives you a very different kind of tools or insight into what your profession might be, somehow.
But also stops this idea of we're going to do one thing that is going to fix everything, and we're going to plan the city on a one way, but we start looking at the world as more, it's a society, but it's made out of individuals, and I think that's also very interesting, this changing that attitude. We were talking this morning about we need a complete change of how we understand the world and how could we live. So radical other ideas is interesting because then we can speculate about how it works, and this could be one of the things to speculate with.
Well, I think it's possible if you respect also our difference. We have similar problems, but I think you need to understand that all these problems are connected. How things in Europe impact in Latin America, the things are connected. So I think it's important to think in a collective way. It's mostly what the quilombolas and the indigenous people are teaching to us, to work in a collective way, to think about the local and the global. So I think sometimes we are so concerned about our own realities and we do not look how it impacts the other realities. I think maybe it's the first step to think how the things that happen impacts the other regions, especially the regions that historically are being colonized, because you have new kinds of colonization happening in South America. So I think it's possible, especially when we are open to see other realities and see how it impacts each other.
Well, I'll just say briefly, I worked with a scientist, even though I taught at MIT, I didn't work directly with any of the scientists there. But when I worked with the marine biologist recently, it was interesting to share the way we worked, and we understood each other perfectly. So I think to communicate to people in other disciplines is very important, and to find the similarities in our approaches and to come together and share knowledge. That's what